It was a sweltering summer evening in 1998 when I found myself stranded on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town in rural Texas. I had been on the road for hours, my beat-up car giving up on me just a few miles shy of the next gas station. With no cell phone and no passing cars in sight, I decided to try my luck hitchhiking. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of red and purple, I stuck out my thumb and began the long wait. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional rustle of dry grass and the distant howl of a coyote. The temperature dropped swiftly, the desert night taking over. After what felt like an eternity, headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as they approached. I felt a surge of relief. The car, an old pickup truck, slowed to a stop beside me. The driver, a grizzled man in his 50s with deep-set eyes and a face weathered by time, leaned over and rolled down the window. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Yes, sir. My car broke down a few miles back," I replied, grateful for the help. He nodded, motioning for me to hop in. I threw my backpack in the bed of the truck and climbed into the passenger seat. The interior smelled of tobacco and old leather. As we drove off, I tried to make small talk, but the man was curt with his answers, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Where are you headed?" he asked after a while. "Just trying to get to the nearest town," I said. He nodded again, and silence fell between us. The road stretched out in front of us, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the barren landscape. The only light came from the truck's dim headlights, casting long shadows that danced on the edge of my vision. After about half an hour, the man turned off the main road onto a narrow, winding dirt path. My unease grew. This wasn't the way to the next town. I was sure of it. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Shortcut," he replied curtly, not taking his eyes off the road. Something about his tone sent a shiver down my spine. The trees closed in around us, their gnarled branches forming a twisted canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The truck bounced and jolted over the uneven terrain, and I clung to the seat, my heart pounding. We eventually pulled up to an old, dilapidated cabin deep in the woods. The man killed the engine and turned to face me, his eyes cold and empty. "Need to make a quick stop," he said. "Come inside. Won't take long." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body felt paralyzed. I nodded mutely and followed him out of the truck. The cabin looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and the wooden steps rotting away. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, the hinges creaking ominously. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of decay. The floorboards groaned under our weight as we walked through the dimly lit space. The man led me to a small, cluttered room at the back of the cabin. An old table sat in the center, covered in strange, archaic symbols carved into the wood. Candles flickered on every surface, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. "Wait here," he said, disappearing through a door on the other side of the room. I stood there, heart racing, trying to make sense of my surroundings. There was something deeply wrong about this place. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if it was pressing down on my chest. I glanced around nervously, noticing the walls were covered in disturbing, crudely drawn images of twisted, demonic figures. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. My mind raced, contemplating escape, but the sound of the door creaking open made me freeze. The man reappeared, holding a small, rusty knife. His expression was unreadable, but there was a malevolent gleam in his eyes. "Time for a little ritual," he said, advancing toward me. Panic surged through me. I backed away, my mind scrambling for a plan. Suddenly, the door behind me burst open, and a young woman rushed in. She was disheveled, her eyes wide with fear. "Run!" she screamed. "He's going to kill you!" Without a second thought, I bolted past her, adrenaline propelling me forward. The man shouted angrily, but I didn't look back. I tore through the woods, branches scratching my face and arms, my lungs burning with the effort. I could hear footsteps behind me, the man's furious shouts growing fainter as I ran. I stumbled onto the dirt path, sprinting back toward the main road. The darkness seemed to close in around me, but I pushed on, desperate to escape. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the faint glow of headlights approaching. I stumbled into the road, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, a middle-aged woman, jumped out. "Are you okay?" she asked, her face filled with concern. "Help me," I gasped. "Someone's trying to kill me." She hurried me into her car and sped off, calling the police as we drove. I slumped in the seat, exhaustion taking over. The police arrived quickly, and I told them everything. They assured me they would search the area and find the man. Days later, I received a call from the police. They had found the cabin, but it was empty. The man had vanished, leaving behind only the eerie, decaying remains of his twisted rituals. They never found him, and to this day, the memory of that night haunts me. I never hitchhiked again. The terror of that experience left a scar that would never fade. Whenever I drive down a lonely road at night, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see those cold, empty eyes staring back at me. I never imagined that a simple decision to hitchhike would change my life forever. It was the summer of 2018, and I was just a 21-year-old college student looking for a bit of adventure. My plan was to visit my friend Mark in a small town about 200 miles away. Money was tight, so I decided to hitchhike, thinking it would add some excitement to my trip. I packed a small bag, said goodbye to my parents, and hit the road early in the morning. The first few rides were uneventful. I chatted with a truck driver who shared stories about life on the road, and an elderly couple who treated me to lunch. By late afternoon, I found myself in the middle of nowhere, a long stretch of highway surrounded by dense woods on both sides. I stood by the roadside, thumb out, waiting for the next car to stop. The sun was beginning to set, and the temperature dropped. After about half an hour, a beat-up old sedan pulled over. The driver was a man in his late 40s with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. He looked rough around the edges, but I was desperate and tired. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yes, sir. I'm heading to Greenfield," I replied. "Hop in. I'm going that way," he said, motioning to the passenger seat. I hesitated for a moment, but then opened the door and got in. The car smelled musty, and the interior was cluttered with empty food wrappers and old newspapers. As we drove, the man introduced himself as Jack. He didn't say much, but when he did, his voice was eerily calm, almost too calm. We drove in silence for about 20 minutes, the only sounds being the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the car's worn-out suspension. I tried to make small talk, asking him where he was from and where he was headed. His answers were vague and evasive, which made me uneasy. The sun had fully set by now, and the road ahead was pitch black, illuminated only by our headlights. Jack suddenly turned off the main highway onto a narrow, winding road that led deeper into the woods. "Shortcut," he muttered, noticing my confusion. I nodded, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But the further we went, the more isolated we became. My phone had no signal, and the dense forest around us seemed to close in. I glanced at Jack, who was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his eyes focused on the road ahead. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "You know, there are stories about these woods," he said, his voice low. "People say they're haunted, that strange things happen here at night." I laughed nervously, trying to brush off the ominous feeling creeping up my spine. "Haunted? Like ghosts?" "Not just ghosts," he replied. "There are tales of people disappearing, never to be seen again." A chill ran down my spine, and I forced a smile. "Come on, you're just trying to scare me." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he kept driving, the car's headlights slicing through the darkness. My unease grew with each passing minute, and I started to regret getting into the car. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab us. Suddenly, Jack pulled over to the side of the road. "I need to check something in the trunk," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. I watched as he got out of the car and walked to the back. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to run. I fumbled with the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I realized the doors were locked from the outside. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Jack rummaging through the trunk. His movements were slow and deliberate, almost methodical. Desperation took over, and I frantically searched for a way to escape. I noticed the window was slightly open, and I managed to squeeze my hand through the gap to unlock the door from the outside. I pushed the door open and bolted into the woods, not daring to look back. Branches scratched my face and arms as I ran, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. I could hear Jack calling after me, his voice echoing through the trees. "Come back! It's not safe out there!" I ignored him and kept running, my legs burning with exhaustion. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from him. The forest seemed endless, and the darkness made it hard to see. I stumbled over roots and rocks, but I didn't stop. After what felt like hours, I finally collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced with fear. I listened for any sign of Jack, but all I could hear was the eerie silence of the woods. I stayed hidden until the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Gathering my strength, I continued walking, hoping to find a way out. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small road and flagged down a passing car. The driver, a middle-aged woman, looked at me with concern as I explained what had happened. She drove me to the nearest police station, where I filed a report about Jack and the terrifying night I had endured. The police took my statement seriously and promised to investigate. They told me that several people had gone missing in the area over the years, and my encounter with Jack matched the description of a suspect they had been searching for. Days later, I received a call from the police. They had found Jack's car abandoned in the woods, but there was no sign of him. The trunk, however, revealed a chilling discovery: various tools and items that suggested he had sinister intentions. I never heard from Jack again, and the police never caught him. The experience left me haunted, and I vowed never to hitchhike again. To this day, I can't shake the feeling of dread that washes over me whenever I think about that night. The woods, the darkness, and Jack's eerie calmness still haunt my nightmares. I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't escaped. Would I have become another statistic, another missing person, lost to the woods? The thought chills me to the bone, and I am grateful every day for the chance to tell my story, to warn others of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. It was a dark, stormy night in the fall of 2005, when I decided to take a road trip from my small hometown in Montana to visit a friend in Oregon. I had an old, beat-up truck that I loved despite its quirks. The truck had seen better days, but it had a reliable engine, and I trusted it to get me through the long, lonely roads ahead. The trip was going smoothly until I hit a stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. The rain pounded against my windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. The road was nearly empty, save for the occasional car or truck that passed by. I was beginning to feel the weariness of the drive when I saw a figure on the side of the road, illuminated by my headlights. It was a man, drenched from the rain, with his thumb out. He looked to be in his late 30s, with a scruffy beard and a worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. Normally, I wouldn't pick up hitchhikers, but something about the desolate stretch of road and the relentless rain made me feel a pang of empathy. I slowed down and pulled over, rolling down the passenger side window. "Need a ride?" I called out, trying to sound as casual as possible. The man nodded, his expression grateful yet weary. He quickly climbed into the passenger seat, and I could see he was shivering from the cold. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaky. "I've been out here for hours." "No problem," I replied, turning the heater up a notch. "Where are you headed?" "Just trying to get to the next town," he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Name's Carl, by the way." "I'm Jake," I responded, giving him a brief nod. "Sit tight. We'll be there soon." We drove in silence for a while, the only sound being the steady drumming of the rain on the roof and the rhythmic swish of the wipers. I glanced over at Carl occasionally, noting the way he seemed to be on edge, constantly looking out the window as if expecting something or someone to appear. "So, where are you coming from?" I asked, trying to break the tension. Carl hesitated, then said, "Been drifting around. Lost my job a while back. Been trying to find work." There was something off about his story, but I didn't press further. I figured he had his reasons for being vague, and it wasn't my place to pry. As we drove further into the night, the rain began to let up, but the unease in the truck grew thicker. Carl's eyes darted around, and he seemed to be muttering to himself under his breath. I started to regret my decision to pick him up. Suddenly, Carl leaned forward and turned the radio off, plunging us into an eerie silence. "You need to be careful out here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Careful of what?" I asked, glancing at him with a mix of confusion and concern. "They're out here," he said, his eyes wide with fear. "The ones that take people. They look like us, but they're not. You can't trust anyone." A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to laugh it off as the ramblings of a crazy man, but the intensity in his eyes made it hard to dismiss. "Who are they?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Carl didn't answer. Instead, he looked straight ahead, his face pale and tense. I felt a growing sense of dread, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. We drove for another hour, the tension in the truck thick enough to cut with a knife. The road was empty, and the darkness seemed to close in around us. Just when I thought I couldn't take the silence anymore, Carl suddenly yelled, "Stop the truck!" I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. "What is it?" I asked, looking around frantically. "There!" He pointed to a spot on the side of the road. "Do you see it?" I squinted into the darkness, but all I saw was an old, dilapidated house, partially obscured by trees. "It's just a house," I said, my voice shaking. "That's not a house," Carl insisted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's where they take you." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Who, Carl? Who takes you?" Before he could answer, the truck's engine sputtered and died. I turned the key, but it wouldn't start. Panic set in as I realized we were stranded in the middle of nowhere with a man who seemed increasingly unhinged. Carl's breathing grew rapid, and he clutched his backpack to his chest. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice trembling. "They know we're here." I didn't know what to do. Every rational part of me wanted to believe this was all just a bad dream, but the fear in Carl's eyes was all too real. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. "We're stuck," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Let's just stay in the truck until morning. Maybe someone will come by." Carl shook his head vehemently. "You don't understand. They come at night. We need to move now." Reluctantly, I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the rain, Carl close behind me. We made our way toward the old house, the wind howling through the trees. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified by my growing fear. As we approached the house, I noticed strange symbols carved into the wooden door. Carl's breathing grew more erratic, and he muttered something about markings of the taken. The door creaked open, and I shined my flashlight inside. The house was abandoned, filled with cobwebs and decaying furniture. The air was thick with a musty odor, and the floorboards creaked under our weight. "We shouldn't be here," Carl whispered, his eyes darting around. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the house. We froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The thud was followed by footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the floor above us. "They're here," Carl said, his voice barely audible. We backed into a corner, the flashlight flickering as the footsteps grew louder. My mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this nightmare. Just as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, the front door slammed shut, and the house was plunged into darkness. Carl grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "We need to run," he said, his voice urgent. We bolted out of the house and into the woods, the rain pouring down in sheets. I could hear footsteps behind us, getting closer and closer. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I kept running, fueled by sheer terror. We burst out of the woods and onto the road, where a pair of headlights blinded us. I waved my arms frantically, and the car screeched to a halt. A woman rolled down the window, her face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Please, we need help," I gasped, my voice hoarse. She let us in, and we sped off, leaving the house and whatever was in it behind. As we drove away, Carl looked back, his face pale and haunted. "They're always watching," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Never pick up hitchhikers. You never know who or what they really are." I never saw Carl again after that night. I dropped him off at the next town and he disappeared into the crowd. I don't know if his story was true, but the fear in his eyes was enough to make me believe. To this day, I never pick up hitchhikers, and I always keep my doors locked on lonely stretches of road. You never know what might be out there, waiting in the dark. My name is Jack, and this story is one I've never shared until now. It's a chilling tale from my teenage years, a memory that still haunts me and makes my skin crawl. This happened back in the late 90s when I was just 17 years old. Back then, hitchhiking was fairly common, especially in the rural parts of Illinois where I grew up. It was a hot summer evening, and I was eager to get home after spending the day with some friends in the next town over. I didn't have a car, so I decided to hitchhike back. The sun was setting, casting an orange hue across the deserted road as I stuck out my thumb, hoping for a ride. After what felt like hours, a beat-up old truck finally pulled over. The driver was a middle-aged man, rough-looking with a scruffy beard and an unsettling smile. But it was getting dark, and I was desperate to get home. I figured it was better to take my chances with him than to be stranded in the middle of nowhere. I climbed in, thanking him for the ride. "Where you headed, kid?" he asked, his voice gravelly and deep. "Just to Benton," I replied, trying to sound casual. Benton was about 30 miles away, and I hoped he wouldn't mind taking me that far. "No problem," he said, with that same eerie grin. As we drove, I tried to make small talk, but the man's responses were short and vague. He mostly stared ahead, gripping the wheel tightly. The radio played some old country songs, which added to the uncomfortable silence. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about this guy, but I tried to ignore it. After all, he was doing me a favor. About 20 minutes into the drive, he took a sudden turn off the main road onto a narrow, dirt path that led into the woods. I think you missed the turn," I said, my voice shaky. "Nah, this is a shortcut," he replied, not taking his eyes off the road. Panic started to set in. I didn't know this area well, but I was pretty sure there were no shortcuts through the woods. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to think of a way out. The truck rattled along the bumpy path, and the trees seemed to close in around us. "Are you sure? This doesn't seem right," I insisted. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned the radio off and the silence became deafening. My mind raced, thinking of all the horror stories I'd heard about hitchhiking gone wrong. I was about to ask him to let me out when he abruptly stopped the truck. "End of the line," he said, turning to face me with that same disturbing smile. I glanced around. We were in the middle of the woods, no houses or signs of life in sight. My stomach churned with fear. "What do you mean? We're not even close to Benton," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. He reached under his seat and pulled out a large hunting knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. "Get out," he ordered, his voice cold and menacing. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. As he reached for me, I threw open the door and bolted into the woods. I could hear him cursing and following close behind. My heart pounded in my ears as I ran, branches scratching at my face and arms. I didn't dare look back. I could hear his heavy footsteps and the sound of his knife slashing through the underbrush. I ran blindly through the forest, my only goal to get as far away from him as possible. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. The windows were broken, and it looked like no one had lived there for years. But it was my only hope. I ran inside and hid in a closet, trying to control my ragged breathing. I could hear him outside, calling out for me, his voice dripping with malice. Come out, wherever you are," he taunted, his footsteps crunching on the leaves outside. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. The minutes dragged on like hours as I waited in the suffocating darkness. I could hear him moving around outside, the sound of his knife scraping against the cabin walls. Then, everything went silent. I strained to hear any sign of him, but there was nothing. I didn't dare move, afraid it was a trap. After what felt like an eternity, I finally summoned the courage to peek out of the closet. The cabin was empty. I cautiously made my way to the window and looked outside. There was no sign of him. I waited a bit longer just to be sure, and then I quietly slipped out of the cabin and started walking in the opposite direction from where I had come. It took me hours to find my way back to the main road, and by then, it was nearly dawn. I was exhausted, covered in dirt and scratches, but I was alive. I walked until I found a small gas station and called my parents, who were frantic with worry. The police searched the area, but found no trace of the man or his truck. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he intended to do, and I never hitchhiked again. That night changed me forever.